Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call to order the May 7th, 2014 meeting of the Frederick County Planning Commission. Would you join us in a moment of silence, please? Thank you. Before we get into the agenda, I would like to take a moment. It's our pleasure to introduce Matt Wendling from the Warren County, who is, along with our Chuck, is at the Planning Certification Program. And Matt is visiting us because this is one of his assignments, is to go visit another meeting. Welcome.
I'm a planner.
Yes, yes, he is. And what your specialty is the...
A little bit of everything. I wear many hats. We just completed our comprehensive plan last year. So,
Okay.
I'm also the certified floodplain manager.
That's great. Thanks for being with us. Our second piece of, not business, but kind of a neat thing is up on the chart. And for those of us at the Planning Commission retreat, we became very aware that we speak an alphabetical soup. And so we call things by their initials and figured that the if you will, the folks that are outside this process may want a quick reference to what these things mean. And while you see them up on the board, I will share with the public through our audience that this will be on the county's website, and the address for this is fcva.us. Will be on the agendas page, the agendas for the Planning Commission. So this item will be there, so if you need a little reference point, there it is. Okay, and I hope it helps. Let's go ahead and deal with the agenda.
Madam Chair, move for adoption.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. We have minutes from April the 2nd.
Madam Chair, I move for adoption of the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Our next item is committee reports and what the Planning Commission sees, and what those of you who have picked up an agenda will see a list of, if you will, committee, let me get myself squared away. It's a list of minutes of 3 of the committees that planning people are involved in. And the reason they're on this list is that we will have those minutes posted with the agendas on that self-same website. We will, as a planning commission, do our usual oral report. So this is just an example of what's there. They won't appear there anymore. So let's get on with the oral reports. And let's see, Mr. Unger, I don't see. That worries me. Development review and regulation, that's Mr. Unger. Transportation, Mr. Oates.
Yes, ma'am. We met on April 28th. We had 5 items on the agenda. One was welcoming signage, the Economic Development Authority, or whatever their latest rendition is. That was one of the things they looked at, plus the business friendly about having some welcome signs in Frederick County. Of course, VDOT has very specific rules about this, and the committee felt that it should be kind of tossed back into the economic development's ball court as far as trying to see what they can put together. The other item was the interstate primary and secondary road plan updates, which we'll be taking a look at tonight. Not a lot to say there. There's a few changes, but Mr. Bishop's going to go over that pretty well. There was an item on the intersection at Tasker and Cross Keys Boulevard. They're looking for an additional lane for left turns. There's been some accidents in there. The county deputies, they thought that would be warranted, so did VDOT, so they're going to take a study at that. Number 4 was private streets in the R5 zoning district. Again, we'll be discussing that tonight. And the committee felt that that it kind of languished in the subcommittee realm long enough. It was time to go ahead and move it through the system for public hearing, which is the reason we're getting tonight. And the other item was the draft of the VDOT 6-year improvement plan. I don't know if Mr. Bishop's going to be going over that tonight or not. Probably not.
I can speak about it if you'd like. It's not on the agenda, but I'm happy to discuss it.
Okay. That's our meeting.
Thank you. I have Mr. Hess from the Board of Supervisors.
Madam Chairman, at the most recent Board of Supervisors meeting held on April 23rd, we had 3 agenda items that were related to the Planning Commission. The first was a public hearing on the conditional use permit for the kennel on Laurel Grove Road in the Back Creek Magisterial District. We had quite a few citizens speak at that public hearing. After the closing of the public comments, the supervisor for the Back Creek District indicated that he had received some additional information and some additional questions just the day before, and asked that item be postponed until our next meeting. The second item related to Planning Commission was a public hearing on the revisions to the floodplain ordinance. There were no public comments. There was a brief discussion on the part of the board, and the changes to the ordinance passed. The last item was discussion of the proposed master development plan requirement changes to the appropriate ordinance. And following brief discussion, the Board of Supervisors adopted a resolution directing the Planning Commission to hold public hearings.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Our first item is we have the citizen comment portion of our agenda. Is there anyone here who would like to speak to us on any matter other than what's on the public hearing or the commission discussion items? Anyone want to speak? Okay, thank you. We will close the citizen comment portion. Our first item is a public hearing. We have a lengthy description of what is being presented. Mr. Bishop will guide us through this effort, and basically what we are doing is taking a look at the interstate primary and secondary road plans, and I do believe that the public hearing portion is toward the secondary road plans. On the other hand, if you've got a comment on a primary or a interstate highway question, certainly feel free to speak to us. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. As most of you are used to, we go through this process about this time every year. The statutorily required piece is the secondary system update. The interstate and primary are something we as Frederick County do to make sure VDOT's well apprised of what our priorities are. So we reassert those on a yearly basis. I will begin with the interstate road plan. As you can imagine, as by its name, it's an interstate road plan, which simplifies it greatly as far as us doing it, since we only have one interstate in Frederick County. However, it's a very busy interstate, so it does require its own independent attention. What we have on there is not changed from last time. I'm sure you're aware Exit 310 is underway. They're working toward the right-of-way phase, they tell us, but we're still some years out from actual completion of that project. But I do have a graphic of it just to show off to you to prove that they actually are working on it. It's just projects of this magnitude do take time. So while it's progressing, it's going to be some time before we see actual construction. But as far as the interstate road improvement plan, that's the biggest doings, if you will. The rest of the requests and priorities remain the same in terms of widening and, of course, the relocation of Exit 307 in the Stevens City area. Moving on to the primary road improvement plan, once again, those priorities have not changed. Route 37 continues to be the top priority, with the top prioritized segment of Route 37 being from Exit 310, I-81, over to Route 522. We believe that That link is very important to us, both in terms of helping us out on Route 277, exit 307, exit 313 to the north, and providing a much better access point via 522 to the inland port. The big project, I guess, that's underway there is 277 itself. As you're aware, we've been waiting some years for improvements to Route 277s. Those are well underway in terms of design. They are starting to look at right-of-way acquisition. However, the deeper they get into the project, the more they realize that it's underfunded. So while you may be more familiar with the Termini discussion being from the interstate all the way to Warrior Drive, it's now more of a from the interstate to Double Church Road, primarily because of the high cost of right-of-way. What you have on the screen is the first piece of that. You see we have the Ayler Road realignment. Goes just for a point of reference, goes roughly over top of the Wendy's to align with Stickley Drive. And of course, that brings back a lot of traffic away from the interstate in terms of all of this stuff, the signalizations and things like that that allows you to clean up. And then this shows you the next segment, which goes out to Double Church Road in the vicinity of the Red Apple gas station there. And I don't expect you to be able to see all these details, just for reference. Moving on to the secondary road plan. Once again, as I noted, this is the piece that's statutorily required. As you look through those projects, you have Sulphur Springs Road, which has been the top project on that plan for probably a decade now. I know as long as I've been at Frederick County, that's been the top. It is moving. They are in the right-of-way phase for that project. Significant improvements at the intersection, and as well as an upgrade of the roadway, though not a significant widening, whereas previously we had been looking at a full 4-lane divided roadway with shared use paths for bicycles and pedestrians and that sort of thing. We are now looking at basically a reconstruction of what you have up to a more modern standard with a wide paved shoulder for those folks to take advantage of. Redbud Road, the realignment of Redbud Road to allow us to get that traffic over to Snowden Ridge Boulevard. It's not got a lot of money on it in the plan right now. It's as much of a placeholder as everything else, but being able to move that project forward is going to be big for us in terms of moving us forward and being able to realign the ramp from northbound I-81 that currently comes down to Route 11 next to Redbud Road out to where Redbud Road currently intersects with Route 11. So once again, that removes an extra signal that's in a very short spacing distance and aligns the on and off ramps from to I-81 from Route 11 on that northbound side. Other projects you see on there, East Tevis Street, you see 2 references to. That's all our Russell 150 revenue sharing work. Martinsburg's Pike. We have a couple things going on there. We have a small revenue sharing project, as well as VDOT has a safety project on there at the intersection of Welltown Road and Route 11 North. Carpers Valley Road continues to be on there, and Renaissance Drive. I would note that we also have a pending revenue sharing application, which everybody's given us the nod and the winks, but it won't be official until later this month or June. As far as the CTB goes, we're looking at a significant approval for Snowden Bridge Boulevard from Route 11 North over across the railroad tracks and into the Greystone development. That's going to be about $4.5 million, which looks like we're going to get approved for. So that's something you'll see show up on this plan next year. And there's just a little graphic of part of the Sulphur Springs Road improvements. Those improvements will go from Route 50 back beyond Greenwood Road, not quite to the landfill, but just past where we expect future Channing Drive to intersect with Sulphur Springs Road. Moving on to probably the least funded of our road priorities, yet I get probably the most calls about, is the hard surfacing program. You will note that the prior number 1, Warm Springs Road, is not on there because it's actually about to get done. It was not comical, but it's sort of comical now. Literally at the Transportation Committee meeting, I get pulled aside by VDOT, said, we might have an issue there. There's a sinkhole opening up next door to Warm Springs Road. We might need you to put that back on the plan. But since then, they've had further time to evaluate it, and we're going to be okay. So that project's moving forward. Now, you may recall from earlier in my talk here how even though a project's underway, it still stays on the plan because these are multi-year projects. That's different with a project like this, which they'll start some point in the next couple months, and they'll be done before the summer's out. So we don't leave those on the plan taking up space. But we're excited to see that they're hoping to have it done by the turn of the fiscal year. It may be a little after, but it's nice to see that that's going to get done. There were no new projects promoted. One of the big transportation stories this year is that on the heels of the new transportation legislation, the estimates for what they expected the revenue to be are significantly under what they expected, what they forecasted when they were passing the legislation. So folks like us are feeling the hit all over the state. Doesn't mean there's not more road money coming in, however, much less than projected. So when you made last year's plan off of those projections, this year there's not additional money to promote roads from the unscheduled to the scheduled list. There are still some minor changes. Laurel Grove Road is the primary one. Previously, we had that on here as one segment. It's the same total project. We've broken it into 2 segments just really for a housekeeping exercise. When we're doing these pave-in-place rural rustic road treatments, and we're using local Edinburgh residency forces, when the project is under a certain dollar amount, it's just easier to get to work. Once it's over a certain dollar amount, you've got to involve Richmond, a lot more back and forth, makes project take longer, makes project cost more. So we broke it into 2 segments, and that's why that's the way it is. Moving on to the unscheduled list, still a very long list. Still a lot of people out there wanting their road paved. We have added 3 new projects at the end. Although remember what I said earlier, since we have not promoted projects, and if you recall from the board's policy, in years that we're not promoting projects to the scheduled list, we don't redo the ratings because that's a big effort and it's a waste of time to rate projects when you're not going to promote any. So you see at the bottom, you see Sir John's Road, Mount Olive Road, and Shockeysville Road have all been added this year. Assuming next year we are able to promote projects, we would re-rate them all. I don't necessarily expect those would be 21, 22, and 23. And to that end, we have also updated that page of the plan to make that clear to John Q. Public, who's reviewing a copy of the plan, so that when they're checking it, say, oh, my road got added. Oh, no, it's at the very bottom, so that they can see a little better explanation. And we have that updated page in front of you this evening. So it's noted in a few places on that page, in addition to adding a not rated in the comments section next to each of those 3 projects. I've added a caption at the bottom as well as at the top in the heading. It notes that ratings are not updated. So hopefully that's very clear to someone who's wanting to see what's going on, to know that they're not necessarily at the very bottom. We actually have to go through the rating process first. With that, I can take any questions you may have. I know Mr. Oates mentioned the 6-year improvement program public hearing. I'm happy to talk about that now, or if you want to call me up at some point, that's whatever you want, I'm here.
Ask the public if there are, no, excuse me, would the commission have any questions now of Mr. Bishop? Any questions?
Oh, and I'll add, I'm sorry, I left it off. The Transportation Committee did review this on April 28th and has recommended approval.
Good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak
Never gets done, I wonder.
to this item? Again, it's a public hearing,
Not much, is it?
and it's having to do with the secondary roads. And if you do have a comment on the primary and interstate, you may make them also at this point. Seeing no one, we will close the public hearing.
Years ago, they used to come.
Any comments? Thoughts? You need to take care of a recommendation to the board? Yes.
I'd just like to say, Mr. Bishop did an excellent job going over this. Appreciate that. Very thorough. And I recommend we approve it.
Second.
Second. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
Well, the citizens just giving up, or they are satisfied?
Can we take what it
used to
is
be
that,
on meetings.
we've gone ahead and gotten the motion that you needed. Want any other information that you asked of?
No, I don't think it's that relevant
Sure?
unless Mr. Bishop. Well, sure, go ahead.
Come on.
Let us know about the 6th year.
As Mr. Oates mentioned earlier, we did participate on April 29th in the Commonwealth Transportation Board's public hearing for the 6-year improvement program draft, which I vetted out what I planned to say with the Transportation Committee, and then even before then with Mr. Riley and Mr. Schickel, so hopefully I didn't get too far off the baseline for Frederick County. But some of the key notes is, in the draft, we don't necessarily have any big programs, big new projects. Not like a couple years ago when all of a sudden we had big dollars for 277 and Exit 310. There's significant money on Exit 313, approximately $9 million, if I remember correctly. I apologize, I'm going off the top of my head, but significant money. About a third of that is for the interchange modification study. There is still money on Route 37 for further design and study. There's actually 2 line items for Route 37 because we have a couple items going on with them. And those are our big ones for Frederick County in addition to our ongoing projects, Exit 310 and Route 277. The key message that I tried to send to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, one was, you always start off trying to say something nice, is how grateful we are for how well the revenue sharing program's been going. As I believe most of you are aware, we take very good advantage of that in terms of using it with public-private partnerships, teaming it up with private dollars to get projects done. They don't necessarily get done fast, but they sure get done a lot faster than they would have if we just sat and waited for those proffers to be realized. So I'm very enthusiastic about the direction that program's going, and that's continued to be prioritized by the CTB and, of course, the General Assembly. So very happy about that, very proud of that in terms of how we're doing it in Frederick County. I did step out and make a note about Exit 313. With about $9 million on there in the plan and about $3.5 million, which is still boggles my mind, the cost of the interchange modification study, there's a little seed money there for a further project. And I work with VDOT guys all the time, so I get a good idea where I think they're going. Now, we have one thing going on with the 313 bridge. It's way under-maintained. It's the most needy bridge, I believe, in the entire northern part of the valley in terms of a redecking. A serious maintenance project is desperately needed. So the point I tried to make to the CTB is if that's what that seed money is for, we absolutely support it. It's needed for the safety of the traveling public, and we're behind it 100%. However, if that seed money is there to start implementing whatever the recommendations may be of that interchange modification study, then some people need to circle back around and check with Frederick County as far as what our priorities are. In which case, our first priority would be, and I think it's well-reasoned and well-backed, the segment of Route 37 from I-81 over to Route 522 off of Exit 310. We believe that would show benefit not only to 313, but as I mentioned earlier, 277, Exit 307, and significantly enhanced service to the inland port, which even though it's not in Frederick County is a vital facility for us, in my opinion. So to that end, that was the point I tried to make, because if that's the project, if that 313 interchange modification is the project that VDOT's trying to build toward, it's being done without necessarily buy-in from Frederick County or without going hand in hand with Frederick County. So I just tried to make the point that major projects are few and far between in this part of the state. It takes years for us to get funded for major projects. It was a really big deal when we got funded for 310 and 277. So I just tried to really hit home the point that if we are being primed for another major project, to be very cautious and considerate for how you choose that project and to work with the local government and consider our priorities before you choose it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item is a information discussion item, and it is the private streets in the R5 zoning district. These include revisions to the Frederick County zoning ordinance to remove the requirement that R5 communities must be quote-unquote age-restricted communities to qualify for private streets. Mrs. Perkins.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission. Staff has received a second request to allow the use of private streets for all types of developments located in the R5, which is the Residential Recreational Community Zoning District. Now, currently, the use of private streets in the R5 is only permitted within age-restricted communities and only if approved by the Board of Supervisors. Now, the amendment before you proposes to allow the use of the private streets within all developments in the R5, but would still require a waiver by the Board of Supervisors. Now, the only modification really to the text in front of you versus the old amendment is an addition that the development must include a minimum of 1,000 lots. So just a little history for the first request. It was reviewed by the DRC in October of 2012. And the Planning Commission, the Public Works Committee, and the Transportation Committee, as well as the Board of Supervisors, also discussed the item in 2012 and 2013. And ultimately, the Board of Supervisors did not send that amendment forward to public hearing. So for the second request, now the board discussed the second request at their February 12th, 2014 meeting, and the board sent that request forward to the Transportation Committee for evaluation. So the Transportation Committee then discussed it at their February and April meetings. At the February meeting, they sent the amendment to the DRC, which prompted that discussion. And then at the April TC meeting, they sent the amendment back to the board without an action. So the DRC discussed this in February, and the committee expressed concerns about the maintenance of the private streets and the potential for the homeowners association to go defunct, and that would then come back onto the county. At least the property owners would request that the county then take the streets over. So that's really the ordinance amendment in a nutshell. Tonight we are seeking comments from the Planning Commission to forward to the Board of Supervisors when they consider this amendment. Be glad to answer any questions.
Questions of Mrs. Perkins? That comments for Mrs. Perkins. Go, Mr. Thomas.
I'm allowed to ask her a question.
Okay, you can do either one.
Okay. The way we currently have it stated, and I want to make sure we're clear on it because, words need to be as specific as mathematics. Mm-hmm. So the way it's currently stated, we require for a private street to be built in an age-restricted community that the structural section or the depth section must meet VDOT standards. Are there any other requirements as far as the design and construction of private streets that they must meet VDOT standards?
The current ordinance only states that the streets conform to the construction details and materials of the Virginia Department of Transportation standards. That's all the ordinance states currently for the age-restricted communities, if that's what you're asking.
We've talked about this for, I think, about 20 years. But my concern, and I have no problem with private streets, with two requirements. First, they're built in accordance with all VDOT design and construction standards. And to make it very clear, I would want to have it specifically stated in a lot more detail than you have here in the proposed changes, that the design, the structural section, the material quality, the workmanship, the drainage designs and construction, the width of the pavement, the vertical curve and the horizontal sections all must meet VDOT standards. And it has to be verified, and you have kind of a template in here, that it has to be verified by an independent professional engineer that would have to inspect it during construction. That independent professional engineer would have to be paid for by the developer or the constructor. and he would have to certify that it meets all VDOT standards as far as quality, workmanship, design, and construction, so that if sometime in the future, and we've hit this a lot of times where we've had homeowners associations want to turn streets or give streets to the county or the state that don't meet standards, if it meets the standards, I don't have a problem with it. Now, the second part of that is I would want to see something on the deed that would say, and very specifically, sometimes we don't put enough specifics in some of our criteria because, you know, we're always walking that line of we want to give the designer, the developer as much leeway as possible to come up with an innovative solution. I think this is one of those cases, we can't give the developer any leeway. It has to be very specific that we meet VDOT standards. The second thing I'd like to see is a statement on every deed that every buyer has to sign that says that they recognize that the streets are private streets, they are totally responsible for the maintenance, that they cannot be turned over to VDOT or the county, and maintenance includes all cleaning and improvements to drainage systems, removal of snow. So every time it snows in the winter, they're not calling their Board of Supervisor representative to find out why their road's not getting plowed. Have it completely in there so that there's no misunderstanding. You know, building a private street is a whole lot cheaper than building something in accordance with VDOT standards. If they build it in accordance with VDOT standards, it'll last 20 years. The life cycle cost will be much cheaper to the homeowner. But when you're buying that house up front, that's going to add a lot of cost to your house purchase. So again, I have no problem with private streets. But if we open it up, I think it's not just changing the wording in the ordinance, in the R5 ordinance, allowing it to be used for any R5 community. I think we need to go into our requirements, put some very clear, very detailed specifications in there for the design and construction, and then also have it recognized by the buyer of the lot or the buyer of the home that they have to actually sign something that says they recognize that the homeowners association is completely responsible for all costs associated with the complete maintenance, snow removal, and everything. And other than that, you know, if we do that, if that's what the buyers want, then that's what they would get. They could buy it. Personally, I'd never buy into a community that had private roads where I had to maintain the roads. Because if something goes wrong and you're out there looking at rebuilding a road that doesn't meet VDOT standards, you could easily be looking at, when you buy right-of-ways, do all the drainage and everything, you could be looking at $750,000 or $1 million a mile. No homeowners association is going to be able to pay for that. So, my comments. Thank you.
Any other comments? Questions? Yes, Mr. Oates.
I'll go along with Mr. Thomas's comments, except for if we're having them designed to VDOT standards today, with the intention that possibly someday they could have to be turned over to VDOT, I don't think we can do that because I've designed roads as little as 7 years ago that today wouldn't meet VDOT requirements because they're constantly changing pavement depth, horizontal and vertical geometry, entrance spacings. Unless you get them somehow grandfathered in, VDOT says, yes, on this date, on this design, we'll take it in the future, but I don't think they're going to do that.
Well, I wouldn't be looking for a commitment from VDOT. What I would be looking for is a construction quality of a road that we knew was going to last some time frame. What I want to get us away from is a road that's built with a subbase that's compacted, 85% compaction, a 4-inch base course material, and an 1.5 inch pavement on top that'll last 3 or 4 years, and then it's gone.
But yeah, I understand. I agree, build it to a good standard, but like I said, if the intention was someday it could come into the VDOT system, odds are after 5 or 6 years, it wouldn't meet the criteria anymore and have to be rebuilt if they wanted to go into VDOT,
But hopefully we won't have to buy right-of-way and all the other stuff.
hopefully.
And I don't know how we can account for future changes, but certainly open to any ideas on that.
Any other comments for Mrs. Bergens?
He's gonna be gay.
Any at all? This has been in front of us so many times, I'm beginning to feel like, how many times can we discuss this? But this came back to us by an odd routing, i.e., it went from the Board of Supervisors Transportation Committee back to the Planning Commission. And so what we are experiencing, I think, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit on what I said at the very beginning. There are people that are in this development that have concerns and who have, if you will, provided to us some comments about what the solutions may be. And if the Planning Commission is amenable, I would like to offer them the opportunity, in spite of what I said in the beginning, to make comment to us. Now, keep in mind that our job is the planning aspects of a project, okay? Our job is not building roads. And so if you'd like to speak with us with perhaps that kind of, yes, Mr. Oates?
Before you get to that, well, finish what you
Yeah,
said. I
no,
just wanted to
I-
add one other item.
Okay, let me finish what I was saying, is that we'd like for those of you, and including the person involved with this project here, to come forward and just make it brief and keep it to what it is that the Planning Commission's all about. Mr. Oates?
I think I've been on every single committee that this thing is passed around on last year. And one of the things I keep hearing is how this is already allowed in age restricted. So why isn't it automatically allowed over in age restricted? And for me, back when this was going through originally for the age restricted part of it, my thinking was an age restricted, people more mature, they drive like they have some sense, so a private road's not a big deal. Plus with the, more mature people, HOAs are more likely to stay together, they're more stable. Whereas if you open it up to, younger people, they might try and buck the system. But that was my thinking at the time when I voted for allowing it in age restricted, was just because the age restricted, I felt like they were more responsible and could handle it. Granted, they could go out and raise hell and spin their wheels, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And that's why I've never been too pro putting private streets in un-age restricted areas. I'm still not 100% sure which way I would vote on this. I'm kind of on the fence. I like the idea of taxpayers not having to pay for somebody else's roads. And like Mr. Thomas said, I couldn't imagine moving to one of these developments where it was on me to pay for the road and the upkeep. Whereas if you're on a public street, VDOT takes care of the maintenance, they take care of all the snow plowing. If you have speed issues, somebody speeding through the neighborhood, you can call the deputy, come out and set up and grant them a ticket. But in a private system, you can't do that. So I'm still all in favor of it for age-restricted areas and don't have a problem with that, but I'm still not sure which way I'd go on this un-age-restricted.
Let me ask a question to clear up my brain, and that is the issue that we're dealing with is R5.
Yes.
Is that correct? So age-restricted can exist elsewhere?
Yes.
Okay. So we aren't keeping out all the people?
No.
How is this handled in a gated community? How would the road system be handled in a gated community?
It's all private. It's up to them to maintain it.
So we already have that.
Yeah,
That's already available to people.
that's what this proposal is.
I think when you put a gate on a private road, it's more obvious to the residents that it's their road. Still, planning commission, our responsibility is, as the chairman said, is to plan. But I think also sometimes we have to make sure that our planning is also protecting the other residents.
Absolutely.
And I think part of this is we've got to protect, we've got to ensure that if they want, if people want private streets, I'm all for personal liberties and giving people what they want. But sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for, you might get it, and they just need to understand what they're getting and what their responsibilities are associated with it. And I think with requiring a standard that might be changing, but at least it's the common workmanship standard from VDOT, which is what we would normally expect in a public road, that requiring that at least helps protect both the people who are buying into that private road and also the rest of the county residents, because they didn't buy into it and they don't have any responsibility to pick it up at some time in the future.
I agree with that, yes. I think you don't have to drive very far to see some of these subdivisions where they were put in and then later turned over to the state, and just see how they've held up.
Any other comments from the Planning Commission? And so, friends, is there anyone in the audience who has provided information to us, like to comment? And keep in mind that this is not a public hearing, and we're doing planning business here. Come forward, sir. If you'll give us your name and magisterial district.
Madam Chairman, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you. I'm Chris Baltrop. I live in the area that is being discussed right now on Tutelo, which is Phase 2 of the Lake Frederick development. Phase 1 is really not an issue because that is all age-restricted. The roads are private. That's not an issue. Last year, I was chair of the Finance Committee, so I understand sinking funds, this kind of thing. So maintaining those roads would require setting up a sinking fund, as we already have for the maintenance of the buildings, so that in 15, 20 years, whenever the roads need resurfacing, there would be adequate funds to do that. So I understand your comment, Mr. Thomas, but I think that's something we can probably handle. I know not all of my neighbors do understand that the responsibility for the roads means that has to be incorporated into the homeowner's fee. So I would agree with you on having a specific clause in the agreement when you sign on that accepts that responsibility. The problem that we have is more the question on Phase 2, where you have a blend of age-restricted and non-age-restricted. And you have a block of non-age-restricted between us and Phase 2 and the main body of the non-age-restricted area. That's going to be high occupancy townhomes. There's going to be a fair amount of traffic in and out there. That requires a public road in at the moment because of the limitation on having private roads in non-age restricted. We also have access to the lake there, which means we have people wandering into our side of the development who can't find the lake for some reason. We had a gentleman late at night who was using the Don's Johns that the builder had set up, and he was questioned, and he was looking for the lake and had used the Johns. So we have a problem with people wandering into the development, which would be solved by having a gate. Gate requires private roads. So what I've put together, and Madam Chairman, I gave you a copy of that, and I gave one other copy to Mr. Molden, but that I've got more copies here if you want to see it, is what I see as the alternatives that we're all facing. Obviously, we have some preferences, but it's almost like a decision tree. These are the various options that are available, and I think it would be useful to have those options out. I think it would take too much time to go through right now. I have additional copies of it. I'd be glad to give that to you, and then maybe we can discuss it in detail more, maybe in the committee at the committee level rather than here. But I do appreciate this being such a concern, and I think that it would be nice if the developer had clear guidance from the county on what is and is not going to be permitted, because they're in the difficult position of having to put in roads right now without having clear standards as to what those roads should be. So I think it's in everybody's interest to make sure this question is resolved with respect to the Lake Frederick development. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Anyone else?
Madam Chairman and Commissioners, I appreciate the opportunity to talk. My name is Larry Atkinson. I also live at Lake Frederick. My concern, you focused on the road meeting VDOT standards, but my concern is based on some comments made at the Transportation Committee meeting that I attended. It seemed to me that the Transportation Committee at one point was concerned about having a criteria established that would provide some assurance, if met, to the Board of Supervisors when they considered whether the homeowners association could meet their obligations to maintain not only the roads, but other expenses that the homeowners face. I think you need a specific criteria in order so that not only the builder knows on how he will be judged, but also what the homeowners can be expected to meet their total obligations. In the case of Lake Frederick, we have other potentially significant obligations that we have to face in addition to this. So you can't just look at the road issue in isolation, because we have a memorandum of agreement between the developer and the VGDIF, Game and Fisheries, and that has not been fully defined. But if you read the memorandum of agreement, there's lots of terms that there's going to be a lot of financial obligation on the homeowners once the developer pulls out. If he lives up to the terms that are specified in the memorandum of agreement right now. There's also, we've never had a community center where in our community, nor a lot of the amenities that are now being promised to us. We have no idea what the financial responsibilities are in that regard. Over the long term, to VGDIF or to the things that we expected when we moved in. So I'd say, if you're going to do anything to forward this to the Board of Supervisors, I think you should recommend that there be a specific criteria that everybody is clearly written and objective, so that everybody understands what is the basis for a Board of Supervisors decision for a request for private roads in the R5 district. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you, Madam and gentlemen. I'm also a homeowner at,
Sir.
my name is Richard Pawlowski. I'm a homeowner at Lake Frederick. I'm retired, so I don't work for anybody. I'm speaking for myself, not for any of the organizations. We at Lake Frederick, if you're not familiar with it, it's an interesting area around Lake Frederick, but we're in two divisions, and I thought it's interesting to know that the newer area, under the construction that started, is one of the reasons there's such a tremendous confidence in the builders is that they're expecting to put in up to 750 or beyond, up to the 1,000 or more homes. And plus an area of non-age restricted townhomes and stuff, which when you think about HOA requirements, it goes into the enormous amounts of money. So there's a lot of confidence going around. You've heard all the details. I'm more concerned with the macro things. I was a Marine, I worked in the aerospace, and I went on to the federal government at the Congress. So I always stand back and look at things, and I'm concerned about the relationship with the lake. We have the Game Commission, we have a lake, we have physical boundaries, we have all kinds of rules and everything, and we got this enormous expansion going on. And you can't call the sheriff department and get somebody to show up at the lake. They have to call the Fish and Games, and I have no idea who these guys are, and they'll suddenly show up. And we've got drug situations, we've got people staying all night in the lake area, and we have homes. And this is why the gated concept is so important to so many people in the new areas, because it would cut back on some of that traffic. So these are just some of our considerations, and we're trying to be valid taxpayers for the county, and every one of us moved here from everywhere, but we came here loving everything, and the Shenandoah is so important to us, so we want to be participating. We all participate with the Transportation Committee. We're very proud to see the work they're doing. So I think it takes some time to get people together at a coffee shop somewhere and sort this out. I know the lawyers are thinking about it, we got committees thinking about it, but there is a large opportunity here to grow the southern part of Frederick County. There's also other things like watershed and agriculture and all those other factors that are big time when you think about what's going on in this county. So the question would be, maybe it would be warranted to get some people together and to make a solution on this. That's only my point. Thank you very much. God bless.
Anyone else? I think it's time for us to ask, if you will, Mr. Lawson, would you like to comment, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Ty Lawson, here on behalf of Lansdowne, which is the developer out at Lake Frederick. Appreciate the comments about, and we hear this from the neighbors that live there. There's over 300 folks that live there now, and it's continuing to grow. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, the age-restricted part is quite active and growing. So the comment that the last gentleman made was he loves everything, and we hear that from our residents, and what this developer is trying to do is preserve everything as we have it. The community was approved as a gated community. The intent is to continue with a gated community, and of course you can't do that without private streets. We all remember when the ordinance was passed, and maybe it was passed too narrowly to allow for an applicant to apply for an R5 development. We're the only one. If they were age restricted for private streets. So the ordinance was drafted for this community and it was approved. That application was submitted and it was approved. There are private streets there. They are built to a very exacting standard that meets or exceeds the depth of pavement, and we agree we need to continue that. They also satisfy all drainage requirements. We agree you need to continue with that because those are the things that will degrade, deteriorate a road. And actually this developer believes in overdoing it because, and I've heard a lot about wear and tear and how older people are much nicer to the roads than younger people and so on. Well, the reality is it's a construction traffic that really takes its toll on this development, on any development. And so this developer and his predecessor knew that and built with a significant depth that more than exceeded the VDOT standard. And that's why those roads are as good a shape as they are today. Some don't have top coats on them, but the depth is there and they're in great shape. And I appreciate Mr. Triplett's comments. Take a look. They've been there for a number of years and they are in great shape. The ordinance that is in front of you, and actually I don't think it was given to you, we did make some amendments to it as a result of the various committees. We added more detail about the requirements of the depth of pavement, that it had to be inspected, that those by Virginia engineers, that they had to certify that not only what they designed but also what was installed to satisfy those requirements. We also have language about capital reserve studies that need to be done on a biannual basis. We do this anyway in our other communities. It's important to look ahead to reserve funds so that you can take care of these roads. The horizontal part, though, we do have a problem with that. We're intentionally trying to build roads that are not these massive things that you can go at high rates of speed on, which is the VDOT standard. We're intentionally trying to slow folks down. We're intentionally trying to gate this community, and that's how the original developer laid it out. So that part, we do have an issue. But the real issue is, and we've heard this loud and clear, make them last. Build them so that they last. At one of our meetings, Lloyd Ingram from VDOT was there and told us, if you build a road to a VDOT standard, you got a 30-year road. It's not a 20-year. If you do nothing, you've got a 30-year road. You take care of the top, you buy yourself another 10 years, and so on and so on. So that's what we need to budget for, and that's what we will budget for. Why? Because the developer's doing the other stuff, putting it into that standard, certifying that it's to that standard. And again, if you keep that up and it's at a much lower cost, appreciate your comments. I wouldn't want to build from scratch a VDOT road or that kind of thing. They're not being asked to do that. They're asked to maintain it. But I got to tell you, the real reason why we're here is we were asked by a vast majority of our residents, many of whom are not here tonight. They didn't think this was an opportunity to speak because it was an information item. They want to keep this gated, not just on one side of the lake, on both sides of the lake. And so that's why we're here. And y'all need to remember the other thing. Not only do we already have private streets, and we're building additional age-restricted sections, which will have still additional private streets, but we have private parking courts. We have townhomes, all of which under our ordinance for years and years and years has allowed for private streets. One of the residents gave us a statistic, and I believe if nothing else changes, we're in the 70+% range of private streets within this community. And again, all we want to do is have the opportunity to finish it. So we do appreciate your comments. We're happy to add standards so that these are built to last, but we don't want to build VDOT roads. We don't want to turn this back over to the public. We want to keep this gated. And so that's the only, to the extent we disagree, that's the only part we disagree with. And we certainly made notes of the comments we've received, and we'll be happy to respond to questions as this goes forward.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you, and we appreciate your participating, and we recognize that each of you has wanted to say something this evening, and we felt that it was appropriate that you do so. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guy. Ms. Candace, you okay? You got enough? Thank you. The next item is also an information discussion item, and there are setback requirements for multifamily residential buildings, and it's a revision to the Frederick County zoning ordinance to reduce the minimum front setback for multifamily residential buildings. Mrs. Perkins.
Again, thank you. As you stated, this is a revision to the front setback for the housing type called multifamily residential buildings. Now, this was a housing type added back in 2013 when we did the RP district revisions. Now, back during the discussion and public hearings, there was a residential streetscape section schematic that was provided as to how this housing type could be developed. Now, that schematic depicted a multifamily building with a front setback of 12 to 20 feet. Now, that schematic was included in your agenda. However, the text adopted for the multifamily buildings actually included a 35-foot front setback, which is contrary to what was discussed during the discussions in public hearings and work sessions. So we have an applicant now that is trying to implement the housing type, and they have requested that the setback be reevaluated to reduce the 35-foot front. So the DRC reviewed this amendment at their March meeting. What was initially reviewed by the DRC was a change to reduce the setback from 35 to 15 feet, but the DRC felt that 15 was too close to the public street. However, they were comfortable with a 20-foot front setback. Now, I know that there's a revised sheet at your seats because the one that went out, it showed a 15, but it's actually 20-foot is what was forwarded to you. So we are seeking comments from the Planning Commission to forward to the Board of Supervisors on this proposed amendment. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Sorry, Candace. Again, specifics, when we say 20-foot setback from the street, 20-foot setback from the edge of the right-of-way, 20-foot setback from the center line,
20 foot from the edge of the right-of-way.
edge of the right-of-way. So is that, again, when I read this, I don't see that as being always clear.
It's in another section of the ordinance about how setbacks are determined,
Okay.
but they're always measured from the edge of the right-of-way. Yes.
So in an area, we could have, we have the edge of the right-of-way, so we could have a sidewalk then, say 6 foot wide, so we could have a building that would be essentially 14 or so feet off the edge of the sidewalk.
I mean, depending on where the sidewalk went, whether they did the sidewalk within the right-of-way or on their property.
Okay.
Right. But you do have to remember with this housing type, it is only permitted within areas that are called for high-density residential. It's not a housing type allowed anywhere. So where this is proposed to be constructed are high-density, walkable, more urban design areas.
Yes, Mr. Oates.
Just for clarification, another reason, 20 feet was discussed, was a lot of, like, water lines require 20-foot right-of-way. So if it happens to be outside the public right-of-way, there's still that ability to get utilities up through there.
Any other comments? Anything that Mrs. Perkins should take to the board with her regarding this?
I'm in favor of it.
Any other DRC members that were there?
Move it forward. I think it's good.
Okey-doke. Thank you, Mrs. Perkins. The items that we've covered this evening, I didn't bring them to your attention, but the public hearing regarding the road construction will go to the board on, actually, not road construction, but the items on May the 14th. The private streets in the R5 zone will go to the board on the 28th. And as well, the setback requirements for multifamily residential buildings will go on the 28th. Okey-doke, I think we're at the end of our agenda. We do have a meeting on the 21st, so we'll see each other within 2 weeks. Anything else?
Second?
All in favor? All opposed? Thank you all.
Even 30